But to talk a little bit about new media, because you often don't hear these things from the mainstream. You know, you're not hearing this from the New York Times or the Washington Post, MSNBC, CNN, or Fox. First of all, why do you think that is? And secondly, how has that opened the door for new voices like your own?
Yeah, I think there's two main reasons why you don't hear anti-imperialist commentary on the mainstream media networks. First reason being, of course, that if you watch any of these, cable news outlets, usually you're going to get ad breaks that consist of advertisements from Raytheon or Boeing or sometimes Lockheed Martin. It's like they're paying these cable news outlets to stay afloat, even though their audiences are fleeing in record numbers, especially right now, post-Trump. The numbers are in the gutter for a lot of these mainstream media outlets. So despite the fact that there really isn't an incentive to spend as much money as they do on advertising on these cable news outlets, they continue to do so. And if there were to be serious anti-imperialist coverage on any of these shows, I would imagine some of those advertisers would pull out. I think there's one notable exception to that, oddly enough, someone who I vehemently disagree with on pretty much all social issues, on immigration issues, on issues of race in this country. Tucker Carlson, oddly enough, he will occasionally speak with an anti-imperialist tongue. He sometimes brings on anti-imperialist journalists and commentators like Max Blumenthal or Anya Parampil. Very, rarely does he do so, and oftentimes he does toe an imperialist line when it comes to countries like China. But occasionally he's like the only one that I hear sometimes say something that's like objectively correct. But the other main reason why you never hear anti-imperialist commentary on the mainstream media is because it's almost a prerequisite if you are going to be applying for a commentator position or a reporter position for any of these media outlets that you don't think like an anti-imperialist. If I was going to apply for a job at ABC, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, and they have seen the things that I've said on my YouTube channel, which again, I'm sure many of you all in the audience right now would agree with, and you'd say, well, that's a rational take. We shouldn't be pushing for more war with Iraq or in Afghanistan or in any of these other countries. The folks at MSNBC, CNN, Fox would look at that and say, you're not what we're looking for. Sorry. Like you speak confidently, you sound like you know what you're talking about, but the substance of what you have to say doesn't align with our interests here. So not only is there speech that is curtailed within the organization itself of all these media outlets in the mainstream apparatus, but also it is implicit in the hiring process for each of these media outlets as to who they're hiring, what their political views are, and whether or not a given applicant's views aligns with their foreign policy agenda.
Yeah, that reminds me of what Chomsky said in that famous interview, I think, with the BBC correspondent. He said that, I have no doubt that you believe what you're saying right now. The point that I'm trying to make is that if you believe something different, you wouldn't be sitting in that chair right now.
Mm-hmm.
The issue of Tucker Carlson, I agree with you. He is sort of an aberration from many of the voices on cable news, in that he continues to have on voices like Glenn Greenwald, for instance, who has not been on many cable news networks in the past few years. I think recently he had on the family of Julian Assange, his father and brother.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think accounts for that? And why is that still allowed on Fox News?
I have speculated for a while as to why he brings on these voices and why he will occasionally deviate from the corporate media norm of just being an all outright imperialist, but I don't really know. I think to a certain extent he does believe in certain principles of anti-interventionism, regardless of what you think of her. He brought on Tulsi Gabbard and would discuss anti-interventionism when it comes to Iran and Syria during the presidential primaries, the Democratic primaries in the last election cycle. Tulsi is not someone I agree with on all foreign policy issues, but they would bring her on to talk about those issues on his show. And oddly enough, something that has never really been talked a lot about in the corporate media sphere, but I've covered on my show, is the fact that Tucker Carlson is actually the reason why the United States didn't go into an all-out war with Iran. Tucker Carlson, allegedly, he called Donald Trump personally after Trump had bombed Qasem Soleimani, which was an act of war, but we didn't have troops on the ground or anything like that. He called Donald Trump and talked him out of more airstrikes in Iran or against Iranian officials and against going into an all-out war with Iran. So I don't really know what it is. I think in a lot of ways, Tucker is a paleo-conservative. He does ascribe to a lot of paleo-conservative values. Again, I disagree with him on a lot of other things. But I think he also can recognize that the average American aligns with these takes on these issues, and that's good for ratings. Regardless of whether Tucker wholeheartedly believes in all this stuff, which I think he does. I think he does actually believe in some of the stuff he talks about. He can also recognize that talking like an anti-imperialist does bring in good ratings. He's the number one news show in the United States currently. And when he talks about supporting Julian Assange, I think that resonates with people as well. This is the journalistic issue of our time, fighting for Julian Assange's freedom. And oddly enough, a friend of mine, Jimmy Dore, who also has a very popular YouTube show, convinced Tucker Carlson that fighting for Julian Assange's liberation is a worthwhile cause. In fact, when Jimmy Dore, who again is a comedian, just has a YouTube show, it's a popular YouTube show, but he has a YouTube show. He's a political commentator and a comedian. He went on Tucker Carlson's show, made a very convincing argument for fighting for Julian Assange's liberation. And Tucker Carlson on air for like the first time I think I've ever seen, he said, "You know what, Jimmy, I didn't always agree with you when it came to Julian Assange, but based on the strength of the argument you just put forward, I now stand in agreement with you. And I think fighting for Julian Assange's liberation is a worthwhile cause." So that just also goes to show that when you enter a situation with honest intentions, you can win over anyone, even if they're on the complete opposite side of the aisle of you on a given issue.